So here I have an app that I built some time ago, and this is a tip calculator, and here's the design view. And if we run the app, this is kind of what the app looks like, okay? And as you can see, it works fine. You can enter it here, you can enter the number, you can move the tip around, and it automatically calculates the tip, and it adds it up, and this is the total here. And so I can use this keypad. I have 102, let's say I want to add a 1. Okay, it makes it 1021, 20%, calculates everything. And this is a fully functional app, but there is something missing with this app. Okay, I don't know if you can see it, but there's something missing, at least from my vantage point. And that is the app isn't exactly, how shall I say, beautiful. It's functional, but it's not exactly aesthetically pleasing. And so, in fact, a lot of these apps that I built, they're kind of very, very functional, but you wouldn't go out and say that they're going to win some, beauty awards or some kind of UI awards, or people are going to come to me for UI advice or UX advice, none of that. And one of the reasons is because I'm building apps that work. I want to show you how to use logic, how to use different plugins, how to use the features of FlutterFlow in order to build apps that work. But still, I have to admit that making an app look good, making an app look aesthetically pleasing is very, very important. Sure, it has to work. The app needs to work. And I think that's very, very important, right? If it works, it works. But still, going the extra mile and making the app look like, it was built by like a professional team that kind of looks the same, has that same look and feel of a stock Android app or a stock iOS app, it definitely makes a difference. And so in today's video, I'm going to talk about some ways that you can take your FlutterFlow game up a couple of levels by understanding and leveraging some of the things that you can do in order to make the app more beautiful, more aesthetically pleasing, and just looking better. And in fact, this is a road that I've been on as well. I'm trying to take my UI, UX game up a couple of levels. And I want to share with you in this video some of the steps that I'm personally taking in order to create better looking apps and easier to use apps. And so hopefully you're going to get some value from this video. And so we're going to be talking about different ways that you can make more aesthetically pleasing apps. Okay, so the first way is you need to master Flutter or FlutterFlow's layout. It's all the same thing. FlutterFlow uses Flutter under the hood. And so here we are on FlutterFlow docs. And if you just Google UI and layout or learn layout, you're gonna find this page. And so you guys need to master it. This is like the basics here, okay? You need to understand what a column does, what a row does, a stack. So this is like super, super basics, right? You also need to understand how to create more complex elements, okay? A lot of you, I'm sure, are not at that level yet, but everything in FlutterFlow is created from these main elements, okay? Like a stack where it overlaps. You have a column, you have a row. So this is like the first step. And so take a look at this. Kind of a more complicated kind of UI element. We have one column, and then we have various things. And so this thing is a row, but inside you're gonna have different columns, right? So for instance, this could be a column 1. This is another column. Inside that column we have row, another row, and this is just a button inside that column. So when you're looking at a UI, and I'm like a visual learner, you need to start understanding how you can build something like that. That's like the basics, right? So take a look at this. Exactly what I was talking about. This is a column. This is a button, right? We can have two columns here. And here you have a row with two elements. You have a rating bar, you have a text. Here you have a column with, this could be just text, or this could be a row with text inside. So you guys need to master it, okay? Everything just comes from that. This is kind of the basics here, okay? Nothing is going to work if you do not master it, because this is where you start building everything. Another way that's going to help you in terms of making your app a lot better looking and a lot easier to use is by looking into templates. Okay, so in FlutterFlow, you're giving a lot of UI elements. And granted, a lot of times I want to, reinvent the wheel. I want to build my own element. I want to build my own thing. And I think a lot of you probably feel the same way. And I can tell you right off the bat that these templates, they definitely serve a purpose. Like they actually follow a very, like the same look and feel as some of the other elements, and they definitely work. So for instance, let's say we create another page. I don't want to mess with this page right now. I say page 2, and I create a blank page, and I come in here and I have a column, and let's say I want to add an empty list, and take a look. Like, it's perfect, right? It works great. It has, there's a lot of thought that went into making this the way it looks, right? Looking the way it looks, right? You have this text, it's kind of light gray, right? So if we come in here, you have this special text color. This is probably black. Okay, it's not even black, it's something else. You can click on it and you can see how it is. And so this is a very, very basic example. And so there are two things that's going on here. One is that you should use more of these templates. And two, you should try to reverse engineer them, right? So I'm looking at it and I'm like, well, this is black. It's kind of a shade. It's a shade of black, right? It's not exactly black. This would be black. So it's kind of a shade. It's a combination with blue and kind of black, right? And this is grayish, right? This is a gray element. So as you can see, it's right here. So it's kind of like, it's not black. It's not something else. And that is because it's not as important as this element. So I'm making a mental note and I'm saying to myself, okay, next time building like a headline and a subheadline, I know that the subheadline is probably a good idea to make it a little subdued, right? Change the shade so it doesn't stand out as much as the headline here. And then we have a button here, and this is a standard button. One thing to pay attention to is the font size, right? You want typically the font size to be the same with all the buttons that you have. Very, it's going to keep kind of everything consistent and nice. And so if we can then delete this right here and we can add something else and we can take a look. And granted, we're just kind of studying it, but a good idea is to use these things, right? So for instance, take a look at this. We have this card details. Let's say we add this. And this is a perfect example of a card. And once you memorize it, once you take a look how it's done once, you don't have to keep reinventing the wheel. You can see, okay, look at this. This is a row and this is a row. Inside we have a column. And then we have an image. This could be inside of a column. And so I can basically right click. I can say, wrap widget inside a column if I want. But in this case, it's just an image. But this is a column, right? Because it has a lot of stuff going on, right? It's a question of how do you want to organize things, right? Here you have one element. If I had two elements, I would have to organize them inside a column. Here I have, I have three elements. I have no choice but to organize them inside a column. So take a look at this one. We have this grayish, the same kind of grayish style, right? Body text 2, this is what subtitle 1, body text 2, again, same thing, except it's the font size is different, right? So this is font size 12, this is 14. So this is good practice because, you got to admit, this card looks good, right? This card looks really, really good. And we'll get back to this card and everything like that in just a minute because there's some important things to say. And so try to use templates as much as you can, unless you have a good reason not to. And when you're using a template, go a little bit deeper. Try to take a look and see, okay, how is it designed, right? Especially for newbies out there, right? Beginners. That's what I was doing when I was starting out. I was like, wow, so I can see it. I can see how it's designed. It's very, very helpful, okay? The next thing that you want to do is you want to use components throughout your app. So a component is different. What is a component? So let's say I add a templated widget, right? So I come in here and I'm looking for something interesting. And how about this? Let's say this, card 7, okay, as an example. Really nice card. A little different than some of the other templates that we just talked about. Looks different, works different, but it has a nice feel, right? Like it has been thought out, and this is a good template to use in your app. But more than that, you can create a component out of it, right? So let's say you're using this all over the place, right? We're talking about a design. We're not talking about the data, right? if we have a situation where we like the design of a card and we want to use it in different places inside the app, but we want that flexibility to change the data around, that's a component, right? So what you can do is once you want to display it, so you want to add it to the page, and then you come in here to the root element, which is a container in this case. You right click and you say convert to component. So if I do that, I can just name the component card, add component, and now you have a component. This is now a component, right? We're in a different screen now. We're not on the page anymore. We're editing the component now. And the next thing that you want to do is you want to create parameters. You want to take this stuff here, this kind of hard-coded text, and create parameters that could be replaced later on when you're displaying different pieces of data. So for instance, this username, right? I can go back to my card here and I can say, well, I want to create parameters. So I'm going to add a username here. I'm going to say this is a string, right? I'm going to add another parameter. It's going to be description. Okay. String. Okay. So now we have two parameters. And now when you are displaying the space, so take a look, we're back on page 2. And now it's just, well, first of all, it's showing just card now, right? Because this is a component. It's not showing everything, right? Because it's a component. And now we're getting 2 errors. And that is because now we need to input our parameters. So I can say, well, in this case, this is username or whatever, in this case, and description. Okay, obviously, you're going to have something else when you actually have the app. But in this example, we have that. You have to create you have to input your parameters. If you do not do that, you're going to have an error. And that's the right behavior because you need to have parameters. Otherwise, it's not going to know what to display. There's no logic for that. And so not only should you be using these templates everywhere, it's going to create a very uniform look and feel inside your app, but you also should create as many components as you can. And that way you're going to have a consistent look and feel throughout your app. Very, very important. I try to do that all the time. And when you're going to start to do that, you're going to change the way you think about apps. Because now you're thinking about that, well, I have a list item. And it happens a lot when we create apps. We have, several lists of different data, but same look and feel, where you can use a component for that. Or you're showing like a card, similar cards, you can create a component. And let's say you have different cards, that could be another component. Okay, and you can create parameters around it. And it's going to take time to kind of get used to this kind of thinking, but it's definitely going to help you in the long run. Another thing that's definitely going to help you to build more beautiful apps is by looking at how sample pages, page templates, or full app templates are built inside FlutterFlow. So if I say I want to create a new page and I don't create like a blank page, let's say I want to create a content and I want to create something that, I don't know, that looks like this, right? With a nice background, I can just name the page and I can say use my theme, and then I can click around. I can come in here and I can see how it's built. I can say, well, where's the background? How is the background built? Is it on a row level? Is it on a container level, right? And it's definitely going to be on the container level because you can't have a background on a column level or on a row level. It would have to be on the container level. And so a lot of these apps, they're actually like professional looking apps. And so it's going to be very good training to open up some of these apps and not only use these pages, but actually take a look at how they're built, right? Yes, you should be using a lot of these pages, but you should always go the extra mile and see how they're actually built from the inside. So we have this container, and look at this. This container has a path, right? It has images. This is a background image. We're getting this image, and this is the image that's actually being displayed, right? This is the image that's a background. And you can also take a look. Well, they're using you can take a look at this box fit, and they're using a cover. And if you change that around, you will see that that image is gonna fit in different ways, right? You have a fit child, fit height, you have fit none, you have scale down. And so cover looks like a nice choice, better than this one because it kind of scales it in all directions. So, cover is what they chose, and a cover is a good one, right? And you can take a look at the text. the font, the color, and all of that. And so this is a very, very good training to not only use the built-in pages and the built-in apps, but actually dig deeper and see how they're built. Now, we've been talking about templates and components, and I haven't really told you why we are talking about it. And that is because you want to use components and templates because they follow standard design patterns. And so my next point is that you have to master standard UI design patterns. So what does that mean? Well, let me explain to you what that means. Let's say I want to display a piece of data. I can basically hit a text, and I can, I have a text field, and I can do all kinds of interesting things. I can center it inside its own element, or I can go the extra mile and I can wrap it inside a row. Let's say I want it to be a row inside a row, and then I can center this row, right? And now it's centered. Not only is it centered inside its own element, but now it's also centered inside a row. And then I can also add some padding, let's say 30 padding. That means it has spaces from the top, left, bottom, and right. And it's displaying the text that I want, but it's something missing, right? And what is it missing? Well, if you add let's say you add a template, okay? So let's say I add a card, right? This card, it looks better than this thing, right? And it's not because we're using a card. It's because a card does something that creates a better experience. So it's not like use a card, but why use a card? Well, the reason a card looks better is because it does various things by implementing various components in a very kind of organized way, right? In a very methodical way. So for instance, this card, it starts with a container, right? And what is a container? Well, you have to understand, what does a container do? Well, a container allows you to create a border radius. It allows you to have a border color. It allows you to have a fill color. It allows a box shadow. It allows, a shadow color, a blur, all of these things. And that is why there are certain design patterns that you just need a container. You won't be able to do it without a container. So for instance, in this case, I can have this kind of nice, rounded corners or kind of this shadow there that gives it that kind of 3D look. I can't do that unless I have a container, right? So now I can right click, I can say, well, I want to wrap it inside of a container. And now we have a container, and then I can go out, I can make this container, I can increase the width, let's say something like that. I can add the padding. Let's say we pad it at the bottom. Now I have a container, and now I can work with it, right? So I can do rounded corners, right? So there you go. Let's pad this container everywhere. All right, so now you can see the rounded corners. I can add, I can have a fill color, maybe just something ever so slightly grayish. Okay, so something like this. That's probably too gray. I can maybe change it. Okay, something like this. Okay, yeah, something like this. And now I just need a border. Okay, let's have a border. Let's create a border color. And I want it to be something like this. Okay, and now we have something. We're beginning to have something. And so understanding when to use what, not blindly using templates or not blindly creating components, but knowing how do you replicate something to look good. Well, in this case, you have to go out and create a container, because a container, I can create an elevation, I can have a box shadow, and look at that, it's a completely different container. We're still miles away from creating kind of a professional UI, but we are getting there, right? And so a container is just one example. There's also other things, right? So for instance, you can click here, you can say, well, I want to wrap this widget, and we also have a card that we can use. So knowing when to use a card, knowing when to use a container is different than knowing when to use a column and a row, because column rows it's a layout thing. Container is more of a visual thing. It's about putting this data together, and understanding how that fills in conceptually is going to take your kind of design to the next level. My next piece of advice, and this is actually one of my favorite points because I do this all the time, and I think this one actually is helping me the most, so maybe it's also going to help you the most as well, is that you should be looking at more Flutter or FlutterFlow apps, and really even Flutter apps is fine. So as an example, some months ago I was looking for ways of building kind of a Tinder clone, and I stumbled upon this article. And this is what the guy built. He built like a little Tinder clone here, and it actually looks nice, right? Take a look at this. There's like a background, there's a card with rounded corners. We have another kind of card here. We have an image inside a container. You see how I'm using the previous knowledge to help me out. We have these buttons with shadows, right? All of that. But I really like this red. I like that red background. And back then I had no idea this was actually, doable with Flutter. I didn't realize that this was possible. And so what you should be doing is you should be looking at other apps, and you should be looking at how they're built, right? So if I scroll down, I can take a look. So he's creating the code for background curve widget, which is this thing right here, this background curve. And if I scroll down, this is how it's built. This is that widget right there, okay? So we have a height, we have a container, we have a shape decoration, we have a rounded rectangle border that's, bottom left and bottom right is rounded, right? So we have a border radius and bottom left and bottom right. So if we scroll up, we see this is bottom left and bottom right. This is not affected. The top is not affected. And so basically you have a blueprint for doing high quality interesting stuff that already exists in an app, right? So I can take a look. He's using a linear gradient with two colors, right, from this color to this color, and then he is using this is some padding. It says discover, and this is, if I scroll up, it's this text right here, right? This is this red widget, and it has as you can see, it has a gradient, right? Kind of light red to a darker shade of red. And so this is an advanced level. Sure, you need to kind of put in the work, but this is the most rewarding part. Now I can take a look, and you don't need to know code, right? You can just take a look. Well, we have a container. That container has a shape decoration. Here, then that shape decoration has a rounded rectangle border, and then that shape decoration has a gradient. And then you come back to FlutterFlow and try to mimic this behavior, right? It's not about coding. It's about recognizing different things. We have padding, right? Padding 46 on top. From left, it's 20. And then we have this text right here. And that's all this thing does, right? And forcing yourself to do that is going to help you to kind of replicate this behavior, because let's be honest, when you're just starting out, you will have no idea how to do this. I mean, let's be honest. If I'm just starting out with Flutter, I will not know, how to create this. I will not know that there's actually a gradient, because to an untrained eye, I don't see a gradient. At least initially, I didn't see it. But what I see is something that looks good. But now, once I look at the code, I can see, okay, there's actually a gradient from this color to this color, okay? And you can Google these colors, and you can see the color, the shade of the color. This is just a hex representation of the color, and so do not worry about that too much. Just understand how it's built, right? Just take a look at it. And you can, you have the entire kind of the source code to the whole thing. So you can take a look at how the other widgets are built, right? They're going to be a little bit more complicated. We have a stack. And if you kind of looked over the first point that I talked about, studied that, you will know what a stack does. You have another, circular border and stuff like that. And so if you want to take this even up a notch or several notches, you can go to GitHub, which is a place where a lot of people share their code. It's kind of a website where people, share the apps. And you can Google for Flutter samples, and you will see all kinds of apps. And so you can take a look at this. There's a lot of examples for apps that you may want to build. So there's even like a calculator, simplistic calculator. And you don't need to actually like compile these apps or build it. You can simply go to a visual samples index, and you can see how these apps are built. Okay, we have like a place tracker and all of that. And if you really want to take your kind of Flutter game up a notch, you can take a look at how all of these apps, like take a look at the source code and see how these apps are built. And my last tip is that you want to practice, practice, practice. After all, practice makes perfect, and always try to make your next app better looking, more aesthetically pleasing than the previous app. And that's the only way you're going to go up a notch. And typically the way you're going to grow in this direction is that by implementing some of the ideas that I talked about, namely leveraging the templates, building components, looking at the source code, looking at other apps, looking at how people build apps with the layout elements, with the padding, apps that are inside FlutterFlow, apps that are outside, checking out repositories, really digging deep, and always looking at how, staying curious, looking at things. You can say, well, this is nice. And why is it like a gray color? Well, that's because they chose it to kind of blend in with the environment, whereas this is white, so it has a higher contrast, right? Then you can take a look at these buttons here. How are these buttons? Why are these buttons? Why are they showing on top of this container? How come they're not? They're perfectly aligned. How is this row aligned? Oh, this is the alignment, space between. If I change that, look, it changes. We don't want that. We want to space it out, right? Understanding everything that's happening here, staying curious, digging deep, questioning everything. And that's how, through this constant practice, you'll be able to build better looking apps, more interesting apps, better, more aesthetically pleasing, and just creating a much better experience for your users. And a lot of this stuff is actually my own advice. So I'm definitely going to be using this advice in order to build more beautiful apps. Not only apps that function, where the logic works and they kind of do what people want, but also apps that look nice, that create an experience for the user and actually make the user use the app a lot more frequently. So I hope you've gotten value here. Now, if you're looking for more content, check out my Patreon page. There you will find all the apps that I built here in FlutterFlow. You can view and clone all the apps, check out the live streams, and also check out the upcoming Q&A, which is happening on October 1st. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll talk to you next time.